Thanks for showing up here. This is a new event for us, and we're delighted that we could host it. And I have the distinct pleasure of being able to introduce Williston's first Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And I know that's a really long title, but I won't steal Nikki's thunder, and she'll explain that title in a little bit. Williston's been doing a lot of work in this area actually for decades. But we have not had a dean's level position reporting directly to the head of school and the Board of Trustees prior to this year. Ms. Chambers has assumed this leadership role at a time in the school's and nation's history that demands a tremendous skill set, one that ranges from listening to teenagers to explaining challenging topics to trustees. Hailing most recently from Smith College, where she was an associate director of admission responsible for multicultural recruitment, Ms. Chambers is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College, and she holds her master's degree from Columbia University. While her undergraduate and graduate work concentrated on African American studies, her professional roles at both Barnard and Smith's offices of admissions positioned her perfectly for Williston's calling to implement our strategic plan for DEIB, which was adopted by the Board of Trustees last year. Importantly, she maintains those college contacts as an active member of ABAFOILS, wait for this one, the Association of Black Admissions and Financial Aid Officers of Ivy League and Sister Schools. Nikki, I think you go for long titles, but ABAFOILS is a good one. In her first months at Williston, Nikki has already proven herself to be a tremendous professional resource to all areas of our school, a magnet to students from all backgrounds, and a generous colleague who has met individually with faculty and staff and launched a very popular lunch series for teachers to learn and talk about race. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Nikki Chambers, our Dean of DEIB. Nikki.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, for that very generous and complimentary introduction. Again, my name is Nikki Chambers, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am humbled beyond measure to be serving as Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging here at Williston. Just to kind of give you a sense of what I hope to discuss today is giving you all a fleshed out sense of my title, because I do think it is Williston's probably record for the longest title on this campus. But they're very different terms, and sometimes we can think that diversity is the same as equity. Equity is the same as inclusion, and inclusion is the same as belonging. And so before I do anything else, I really want to make sure that we are intentional with our language. So part of what we'll do today is really talk about the difference between those four terms and how they are the North Star to this work. In addition, I would like to take the opportunity to show you where the strategic plan lives on our website, and give you a little history behind that strategic plan and how that's going to be sort of another North Star for this work. And then after I do that, I want to answer your questions. What are you interested in? What are you curious about? What are you wondering about? So I really want to make sure that this is something that is centered on answering your questions or listening to your comments. Does that sound good? Okay, great. So let's talk about diversity. So diversity involves differences of social identity groups. And we all hold such rich identities in all of these categories, right? We all have, if we're able-bodied, then we're categorized under ability. If we have learning differences, that's categorized under ability as well. And oftentimes ability is about issues that we can't always see in people. So that's just one example of a rich identity that every single one of us in this room holds. But identity markers can be involved with race, ethnicity, gender, expression, gender identity, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, religion, and so much more. So diversity really is a call to action for us to really think about who we are besides what you can see, and how we can have conversations about what makes us unique and special. Equity is about providing people with what they need, right? So equity, not equality, because equality means that everybody gets the same thing. But that doesn't really account for the differences that people and different accommodations that folks might need. So equity means that every single member of the Williston community is provided with what he, she, or they need in order to thrive academically and socio-emotionally. Inclusion. Inclusion is a verb, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Inclusion is about the deliberate act of bringing people into the Williston community. It's also about bringing people into our community norms and into opportunities that will allow for meaningful pursuit of happiness. What I appreciate about inclusion is, one, it's something that we have to actively strive for and work towards. But it's also about providing people with what they need so that they can thrive in this community and be happy. And that is something that feels foundational to our nation's history, right? Like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Inclusion is a part of that. And belonging. When I was first offered this job, Bob said that I could kind of turn this title into whatever I wanted. So after I decided I did not want to be like Chief Executive Officer of Williston, I decided I was thinking very deliberately about my title, and I wanted to add the B for belonging. When you go to Williston's website, the first thing you see is that you belong here. And I really wanted to make that a part of the fabric of my office. And belonging is really about a human need. Every single person in this room, in this community, and beyond has a human need to feel secure, has a human need to feel supported and accepted in the Williston community as his, her, or their authentic selves. And that's what we want to do. We want to cultivate an environment where every single member of our community feels that they belong, that they are embraced for who they are. They can learn and be the best version of themselves in this community because we embrace them for who they are. So I just wanted to take a moment to really just kind of flesh out what those 4 terms mean and how they relate to the work. I also thought I'd take an opportunity to share a little bit about what I've been up to. So I was appointed into this position on July 1st, which means I've been here for like 3 months and 20 days. So that's really not a long time in the grand scheme of things, but I did want to share some of the things that I have been working on thus far. One of the first things I was able to do in partnership with the Dean of Faculty, Corey Fogg, was facilitate an implicit bias training and a social identity workshop for all of our faculty, which was a really great introduction into DEIB work, right? Starting with ourselves. This work is not successful if we don't start with us, and we start with a firm understanding of who we are and what we bring into the classroom, what we bring to this community. So it was a really nice opportunity to start that foundational work with the larger group. I have conducted 40 and counting listening sessions that can last anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, where I ask very specific questions about DEI from various faculty member and staff members' vantage points in this community, where I'm asking questions. What are your challenges as it pertains to DEIB? Do you feel empowered or equipped to interrupt bias? What is it that you want to learn more about? How can I support you in your work? And it's been a really informative conversation that I think also gives folks an opportunity to get to know me and ask me questions about the work. I facilitated an unconscious bias workshop for the enrollment management group, which was really, really fruitful. And I've also, as Bob mentioned, I've hosted weekly lunch and learns where we've talked about why it is so hard to talk about race and racism in our community, what holds us back, what makes us uncomfortable, what makes us fearful, and how can we have those conversations? How can we discuss various scenarios with each other? How can we use each other? How can we build community around this discomfort so that we can embrace it and do the work that we need to do for our students? So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update of what I've been up to thus far. I imagine I'll be up to many more things as I get my feet wet into this role. And lastly, before I open it up to Q&A from all of you, I wanted to show you our strategic plan and where it lives on the website. So have any of you seen this document before? Show of hands if you have. Okay, so a few of you, but that's why I'm here. We'll talk about it together. So this strategic plan was created with the assistance of the Anti-Racism Committee, which was filled with folks that are in this room, such as Bob Hill, various trustees, various faculty members, alumni, parents of students. But what this committee did was really think about what has Williston done and what does Williston need to do to foster an authentic sense of belonging in its community. So there is a lot here. I will show it to you briefly, but it lives on our website. I encourage you to look at it. One of the things that I hope to do is make this something that lives on our website where folks can easily check and see what progress we've made so that we can show what we're doing, what we've started, what we haven't started, so you all can follow along on this journey with us. So first, starting with so we have goals to revamp administrative and governance infrastructure. Action 1.1 was hire a full-time Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Check. And we also have various goals related to leadership and infrastructure. We also have goals here about increasing faculty and student diversity. We have goals here about enhancing the student experience in education. Issues pertaining to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are life skills that we are responsible for teaching our children. Our children are going to be competing in a 21st century economy where we have to embrace difference, and we have to embrace people that do not look like us, but we have to learn how to respect them, how to foster an authentic belonging with a rich workforce where we might not have anything in common. We're sending our students off to college where these issues are front and center, and colleges are looking for students who have cultural competence, who can be great roommates, who can be great teammates on a sports team, who can be great leaders in the community, who can provide various perspectives inside of the classroom so that the conversations in those spaces can be rich and fruitful. So we have a responsibility in making sure that our students are equipped with what they need so that they can enter these spaces with dexterity and success. Goal 4, augment faculty, staff, and administrative training. We have started that, but I look forward to seeing all of the ways in which we can have critical conversations around DEIB. And finally, just seeking alumni and community involvement. So all of these goals really work hand in hand, and this document really is my North Star in how the work that I do helps us to actualize this plan. So I just wanted to share all of that with you. Thank you for your patience as you've kind of listened to me kind of yammer on and on, but I would love to just answer any questions that you all might have. Yeah. So the Anti-Racism Committee, and Bob, please feel free to fill in because this is kind of institutional context that I just wasn't present for. But really this committee started in the wake of the racial reckoning of 2020 when Williston was able to kind of look in the mirror and say, what have we done? What haven't we done? And what needs to get done? And diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I mean, in my mind, if anti-racism isn't at the core of equity work, then how is it equity? This work should be joyful. Pursuing anti-racism should be joyful. And it is a part of the larger work that we need to do in this community. But race is a critical component of that, and anti-racism is mission critical to the work. I hope that answered your question.
It's just like, for me, it just doesn't, it just talks about racism, the title it's not in alignment.
So the Anti-Racism Committee was founded in June-ish of 2020, and then they created this position to not only focus on anti-racism, but to also focus on other aspects of belonging as well. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I might just come up.
Yeah.
And since Nikki wasn't here for that, but essentially, as Nikki alluded to, the country's movement, the awakening, the reckoning, call it what you like, caused all institutions, this isn't news to you, around the country, you saw it in the headlines, to reflect on ourselves really critically and say, what is it that we have been doing and what could we do better? And so we formed, I called on a group of trustees and alumni and faculty to come together and really intentionally study that question. And we did that over a working group that produced the DEIB strategic plan. It's challenging. Nikki started by saying that words really matter, and some of the words we use mean different things to different people. I realize that. So really, the question for me might be, what does anti-racism mean to you? Robert Hill. And to me, it means sort of an active understanding of race in the country. That's how I look at it. And to make sure that we're actively pursuing it. There's some simple things, right? I mean, you probably saw this in the, in the question. I have a child who's a sophomore down at Yale, and Yale had a name on one of their colleges that was offensive historically to the folks of color who had to walk beneath that archway every day, and they came to terms with that. So I would point to that as kind of one example of what we're talking about, but on a lower or sort of maybe not as volatile level, saying, who's represented in the works you choose to read at your school? And we're just shining a brighter light on that perhaps now than we have done in the past. I don't want to suggest that Williston's never thought about any of this before. I've been in education for 35 years, and at every school I've been in, we've considered and thought hard about how do we do this better, but I think there's just a sharper light on it now. Does that help a little bit more? Yeah.
Yeah?
So I saw you put some goals out there, and unfortunately I couldn't read it, but for every goal that you list out, there should be a way to measure that you're attaining your goals.
Of course.
How are you guys measuring that you're successful in that listing?
Yeah. Something that I've been thinking very critically about, as Bob knows, is I'm very interested in data. And I'm very interested in measuring these goals because some of them, there are very concrete ways to demonstrate their success, and some not so much. So as I'm building this department, I'm thinking very critically about how we measure those goals. Some of those goals might be measured in survey distribution. Some of those goals might be measured in looking at numbers and seeing where we have increased representation and where we don't. Those are just two tiny examples of how we can measure success with this plan, but it has to be hand in hand. And one of the things in the strategic plan that they mention in terms of accountability, because I believe in accountability, it's really important, is one, having a yearly evaluation with the Board of Trustees around what Williston has accomplished and what we will continue to accomplish. There is the NAIS survey that Williston pushed out last year in the community. That's going to be another great way that we're going to measure our success. Data is rich, right? Data can be qualitative and it can be quantitative. And I'm thinking very critically about how I can use both of those methods to measure and demonstrate the success of this plan. I hope that answered your question. Okay. Yeah.
Every school tells you how many students of color they have. They never say anything about the diversity of the faculty. So I'm happy to see that on the goals. But what are some of the concrete things that you're going to do to try to improve that diversity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So for those of you that didn't hear the question, it was about how do we plan on recruiting and more faculty of color. And so I think it's a multifaceted question because Williston has had faculty of color in the past, so it's not just about recruitment, but it's about retention. So we have to think about how we're going to create an environment that provides real, tangible, and ocular opportunities for BIPOC faculty in this community. And I know that I'll be working in tandem with the Dean of Faculty, Corey Fogg, who is rich in her expertise in not just the hiring of faculty of color, but retention? How do we make sure that we are creating an environment where there are real, rich, not just career opportunities, but an opportunity to foster an authentic sense of belonging in this community as a faculty member of color? And that's going to come with, I think, one, a heightened awareness with the community that we already have, right? What are the conversations that we're having as a community currently about issues pertaining to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How are we fostering a collective sense of cultural competence? How are we fostering a sense of belonging? How are we fostering inclusion? So that when folks do join our community, they see it for just the rich community that it is, and they see themselves and they see their place here. So that's going to be something that I'll be working in partnership with not just the Dean of Faculty, but also with the rest of the senior administrative group, and of course Bob as well.
So a couple of I appreciate your compliment, Nikki. I'm 45 members of faculty, and I have the great fortune of working with Nikki. And a couple of concrete things that we can do once we get back to what hiring will look like in a more traditional year. Going and being present, as Nikki said, and finding spaces and places where BIPOC candidates are. At my previous position, I was traveling to HBCUs and trying to get in touch with undergraduates who were discerning in a path into education. How can we incentivize and make them think about why Williston would be a great place for them to find affinity, to grow professionally, to be supported by a head of school who's really put strategic focus around this topic. Also going to other organizations, whether it be nonprofit, that are affinity-based. So there's organizations that are particularly geared towards cultivating Black men, for instance, or Black women, for instance, and targeting those organizations and coming in to understand their structures and how they support candidates, how folks are discerning what professional path they'll go into. I think a lot of it is, as Nikki said, like I'm really focused on retention. Because I can bring as many folks as possible to Williston, but unless we feel a sense of belonging, the same that we cultivate for students, unless our employees can see themselves thriving in an institution, they will stay. And so Nikki and I are really going to be working on going out and attracting talent and bringing those folks to Williston in conjunction with the other senior administration. So, and I would add, anything you can do to help us is much appreciated, because you are our best resource in terms of driving new families to the school for enrollment, and certainly driving talent to the school to discern a career in education and serve the mission. So we thank you in advance for that work.
Thank you, Corey. And I think Corey's comments are also a shining example of how my office is a community office, and all of these goals don't just happen on the backs of one person, that this is going to be a team effort. This is a 5-year strategic plan. And Rome was not built in a day. Rome was built with a community, and we have just a wonderful community that's already here, and we're all going to work together to actualize these goals in the plan. Yeah.
So it's a two-part question.
Okay.
So one, you said you did about 30 listening tours.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's come out of that in terms of what people talk about as some of the biggest challenges around this work?
Mm-hmm.
And two, will you be working directly with students? It sounded like you're doing a lot of work with the faculty. What's the structure for hearing from students and working with students?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I hope to, I'll answer your second question first, and then I'll answer your first one. I'll go backwards if you don't mind. I started opening up listening sessions to students because I want to hear what they have to say. One of the things that I'm learning in the listening sessions is we have an institutional barrier of time, and our students are very, 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 very busy, as I'm sure you know. I'm sure they call you often and tell you how busy they are. And I'm sure they call you all the time, dare I say. So one of the things that I do hope to do is offer listening sessions, not just to students, but faculty, non-teaching staff, alumni, anyone who considers themselves in relationship with Williston. I want to hear about their relationship to DEIB, what they're seeing, what they're not seeing, what they hope to see. And just from the vantage point of being a new person in this community, it has been so helpful to hear from people who have been at Williston for a long time and have seen the ebb and the flow of this work before my arrival, and just kind of speak to that institutional history. So they've been helpful just from the general perspective of being new and just wondering, okay, what is the current climate around DEIB, right? This plan, this beautiful plan that we have is telling us where we want to go, but we need to know where we are. And so we have they're one-on-one listening sessions, they're confidential, right? So I try to make sure that people know that whatever you tell me is not going to leave this space. But there have been a couple of emerging themes that I've noticed. One is the institutional barrier of time that we will be working as a senior administrative group to solve. Every time I come to Bob's office with a challenge, I really try to present it as an opportunity. I was like, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. We're gonna step in it, but we're gonna do it better, right? One of the things that I've also noticed is that people are so excited to do this work. They want to be inclusive in their teaching practices. They want to offer really rich topics of discussion as it pertains to issues of DEIB. So I'm noticing that people are really excited to do this work. They're just looking for a place to begin, and they're looking for guidance. So those are two of the themes that I think that have emerged most prominently for me, is that there is excitement, there is desire. It's just thinking about when and how. But those are not impossible to solve. We can solve those issues, so. I think to respond to your question, I think it's complicated, but one of the things that I go back to is just thinking about equity, right? What is the foundation of equity? And the foundation of equity is providing students with what they need. And so knowing that there's space for both, right? We have space for affinity groups where folks can talk to folks that look like them, to talk about issues that they experience that are unique to them because of the identities they occupy, right? So there's that, but then there's also a need for folks who want to talk to people of all different identities and are also, because racism isn't something, and issues of identity are not issues that just affect BIPOC students, they affect all of our students, right? So there's also a need for those spaces to be multicultural, where you can have those rich discussions with white allies and other allies that may not look like you. But I think it's a both and. I don't think it's an either or. I think you can have spaces and you can have affinity groups where folks can see themselves centered in the work, right? And that's really important. And where they have a space where you can fill up your own cup, right, before you go off into the week. You have a space where you can talk about issues that you see and maybe only other students that look like you also see, right? So I see the need for both, and I don't think that we have to sacrifice one for the other. We also have a multicultural affinity group, like a group for MSU, Multicultural Student Union. So that is the group for all students, and then we continue to have our Black Student Union for students who want to have conversations with people who they might not have to explain the back context of something, right? When we talk, when you're in, this is just a tiny example, right? But if you are in the Black Student Union and you want to talk about, oh yeah, I had to code switch because blah, blah, blah. We don't have to have a conversation about what it is, right? Everybody's caught up. So we can just kind of have that space where people can feel validated in their experiences and what they're saying. And I think there's value in having both of those spaces.
Nikki, can I just chime in?
Yeah, please.
I think that was a profound question. I think it's a great question you asked, Paul. I appreciate your asking it. One of the great epiphanies I've had, and I've been in this work for decades, is the big change is coming from the kids. And the BIPOC students have found their voice, and that is a great thing. And so what may have been good 10 years ago at Williston is not good today. Good is not the right adjective. Is not sufficient today because the children have changed, and so we always have to serve them in whatever capacity they have here at the school. We're always changing. Schools have to be evergreen and evolving, whether that's in learning styles for all students or addressing the needs of students who may be underrepresented. It's not lost on me at all that Williston has 30 different countries represented and 25 different United States. So we've got folks from all over the world and backgrounds here. And I love the fact that Nikki is so approachable with the students, because that's what they need. They need to be heard right now. But the gray-haired Bob Hill also realizes that they're kids. And what I think is great, and I'm delighted to see you all here, is have those conversations with your children. You know, bring your wisdom and the experience you have seeing kind of the arc and sweep of societal change to their vibrancy and to their idealism, because that's kind of where we are right now, I think. And I do agree with Nikki that that it's an and equation, that the kids who want to meet in whatever groups they are get energized and affirmed in those groups, and then they feel empowered to come out into the larger group and make themselves heard in ways that just didn't happen 10 years ago. So it's a terrific question. So sorry to take your mic.
Please do. And I think what Bob said about allowing students to just be teenagers in this community is really powerful too. And one of the things that I try when I'm meeting with students is to say, you don't have to carry this burden on your shoulders. Your parents sent you here so that you could get a quality education, not to battle everything, right? Like, come to me, talk to me, I will act, I will listen, I will believe you. So also making sure that students don't feel like they have to carry the burden of the world on their shoulders. And I think a lot of our teenagers do see that because they're just looking at reality and what's been in how they've grown up, what they're seeing in terms of just our social landscape. So I try to make sure that students understand that you don't have to carry this burden on your shoulders alone, that I'm here, and that I want to work with you. But I also want to see you come to Williston and do the things that your family sent you to Williston to do. You came here to get an education. Let's make sure that you get an education where we can keep you as whole as possible, as affirmed as possible, where you feel an authentic sense of belonging. I saw your hand up in the back.
So the question was, implementing diversity and inclusion in an institutional organization. Sometimes it comes, not only that, it's challenges, right? And with that, there's some resistance that comes with it.
Sure.
My question is, what is Williston doing to experience some resistance, either at the upper level or lower level of children, parents, and if so, what strategy do you guys have in place to handle? Consider that people are different, and sometimes those resistance to change is not because of denial, it's because you're just different. You're not used to it.
Yeah.
So what is it that you guys have put in place to make sure that the resistance to change is disseminated in a way that is acceptable?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a profound one. I think one of the things is talking about it, right? Like talking about discomfort when it comes to tackling these topics, articulating the fears that people might have when embracing these conversations. A lot of the times, as you mentioned, people are not comfortable being uncomfortable. So one of the things that I try to emphasize in my work is that in these conversations, one of the things we do is we have community norms, right? So even before we start to talk about heavy things, we identify how we're gonna embrace this space, how we're gonna have conversations in this space. So everybody is operating from the same foundation, right? And the other piece of it too that I think is incredibly important is with the strategic plan. I'm so grateful that this was actualized before I arrived, because that plan is Board of Trustees approved, which means we don't have to debate about whether or not you agree. This is where we're going. And I will do my best in these conversations to keep folks as whole as possible as we have these conversations. I want people to leave these conversations feeling empowered, feeling as if they've learned something that they can take back to their classrooms, they can take back to their students, they can take back even to their families. This is such a multi-layered issue. It's about who you are as yourself, so you have to critically examine yourself and the messages that you received growing up about issues of identity, not just about race, but ability and class and gender expression and all of those different things. It's also about the interpersonal, how you relate to other people and how you talk about these issues. Also, what's happening at the institutional level and what's happening in broader society. So this is a multi-layered approach, and what I hope to do is after each conversation, people leave feeling whole and empowered. It doesn't mean I'm gonna keep you comfortable, because I can keep you whole with making sure that you're uncomfortable, right? I think we all can point to a time where we've been uncomfortable, but that was where we grew the most, because we saw something we didn't normally see. We've had aha moments that we weren't able to see because we kind of pushed ourselves into an uncomfortable place. But what I never want to do is push somebody into a danger zone where they're triggered and they can't grow. So I really do try to foster a sense of a strong foundation so that when we have these conversations, people can stay whole while we do so. Absolutely, and that is in the strategic plan. And I think it's multifaceted, right? It's not just about what we're teaching, it's about how it's taught. And one of the things that I'm thinking about very critically is when we're having conversations about inclusive pedagogy, right? When we're having conversations of how we're going to diversify the curriculum, we also need to make sure that our faculty are collectively in a place where they can teach these things effectively, right? And make sure that we equip them with the resources that they need so that they can step into these tough conversations or brave conversations when we diversify our curriculum. So it's multifaceted. It is definitely in the strategic plan to diversify the curriculum across the board. Your powerful example of history, I think, is one of the ones where we can so clearly see the discrepancies in what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. But that extends to math. It extends to science. It extends to computer science. It extends to music theory. It extends to art history, right? So thinking about these respective subjects and how inclusive practices can go a long way to broadening the minds of our students. Well, one of the things that I think is so joyful about working with teenagers is that they are so malleable and so much, I think broadly speaking, schools for a lot of students will be not just on the secondary school level, but in college and beyond. Schools are really where a lot of students experience the most diverse perspectives. Because we just live in a society where it's very easy to opt in and out of pursuing those perspectives, right? We have various echo chambers as they relate to how we talk about certain issues. So I think at a school, we have probably a really unique opportunity to embrace those dialogues. And one of the ways I think we embrace that resistance, because we can, is by just teaching kids how to embrace conversations like this, how to have tough conversations, how to make sure our faculty are equipped to embrace those tough conversations. Because the onus is not just on our students of color, and it should not be. And I want to make that so clear that I want to see students of color navigate this community and not feel the burden of having to educate everybody on everything, because that's not why they came to Williston. They came to Williston to learn. So that's going to be our job as adults, to make sure that we cultivate an environment where we are able to correct when we hear something that is factually wrong, right? And we do so while keeping, again, students whole. And I do believe we can do both at the same time. But, I think it's a really important question to ask. I don't know if you, Bob, have anything to add about resistance.
I just think that teenagers, by definition, are resistant. So we're used to doing that and working with them. But you're right, and I think Nikki exactly pointed out that in America, at schools like Williston, white kids very often encounter the most diversity they've ever encountered, and that will continue in college. And all we're trying to do for all of our students is make sure that we're setting them up for the most successful college career they can have, and there is no question but that they're going to encounter even more diversity at most of the universities and schools they go to in this country. In that sense, it's a good problem to have. But you're right, the resistance of kids, hey, that's what we do. And I think, just to reiterate a point that Nikki made, top down, we have tremendous buy-in for this at Williston, from the board on down. And I do remember Nikki telling me that her aha moment after about her first 10 listening sessions with faculty were how excited they were to dig into this work. So we're a school primed for change and positive change and growth in this area.
What about resistance from parents and alumni?
We sometimes get resistance from parents and alumni on this issue, but that's not really any different, Paul, than lots of other issues too. We could say that we're going to change check-in hours for boarding students on Saturday night, and I'd have resistance to that. So we're pretty good at pushing back.
And I think, one of the great things about working with Bob is that I do feel like I have his unequivocal support in this work, and that is very important. So resistance is natural, but if you are backed by not just Bob, but the administrative team, the board of trustees, the resistance is something that's manageable. I don't expect everyone to agree with everything that Williston is doing, but at the same time, it's hard to provide a powerful resistance to a plan that has been approved by the board of trustees, that wants, that people want to see annual accountability for, like the horse is out of the gate. So the time to kind of, wade back and forth as to whether or not it's something that you want to do is over. That we're doing this. And not to say that I don't embrace feedback, not to say, because I embrace feedback from all of you, and I've really appreciated your questions today, but it's just powerful to know that this is something we're doing. So I think that kind of helps, that there can be resistance, but it's not going to stop the train from moving forward.
One last question.
Okay.
How are you guys ensuring that I don't know the composition of the board of trustees, which I should because my child is going to, but I know the board of trustees is actually approving diversity on paper, because as you said, they approve all your plan. How is that composition? Are they related diversity and composition? Because you see, most corporations, organizations, they have a board of trustees, they approve all this stuff, but the constitution by itself is not diverse. There's no woman in there, there's no gender related, so I want to make sure that while they're addressing that on paper, their composition itself is reflected.
So that's also a very good question, and I'm very proud to say that we have wonderful representation on our board. Could it be better? Yes, but just this year, our new class of trustees of 5 members on the board included 4 who were BIPOC, and we are working and have been for the last decade on making sure that our board has a generational representation, has gender representation, has diversity representation, really in all ways. But you're right. I think that I can't speak to the corporate world as much, but in the educational world, we're very committed to making sure that our board is reflective of the students at the school as well. So that, to answer your question, head on, that when the board is making major decisions about the strategic direction of the school, they're doing that from a position of diverse ideas, and I felt really good that in fact happened this time around. So it's all progress. Williston's a microcosm of our city of East Hampton, of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and of the United States, and all the comments that I've heard today, I think I could turn back around and say society at large, the United States of America or other parts of the world, and we'll do our bit. Because I do think that the more we get it right with the young people today, the better it is across those 30 countries and 25 states down the road. So I think, are we wrapped up with time here, Eric? Are we at the end of the program? If there's one more question, or... These are really terrific questions, and I want to thank you all again, and I want to thank our Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, Nikki Chambers. So thanks, everyone.